Hello. Thank you all for coming. I'm Supervisor Terra Lawson-Remer, Vice Chair of the San Diego County Board of Supervisors. And before we begin the summit today, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that we lost a fierce gun safety advocate and trailblazer with the passing of Senator Dianne Feinstein this morning. Senator Feinstein long advocated for common sense gun laws to reduce gun violence and was a strong proponent of universal background checks. She was a fierce advocate who was instrumental in the passage of landmark federal assault weapons ban in 1994. So if you would take a moment with me. Thank you. We've all read the headlines, the stories of lives cut tragically short and the communities left in anguish. And many of you have been personally a witness to gun violence or had someone in your life affected by it. In the United States, more than 30,000 people have died by gun-related deaths this year alone. And there have been 500 mass shootings. Murder by firearm in the United States is 22 times higher than in the European Union. And we know that California's gun safety laws are working. Our gun death rate is 43% lower than the rest of the United States, 43% lower. Gun laws helped save 19,000 lives of Californians in the last decade. This week, 23 gun safety bills were signed into law by the governor of the state of California. The author of two of those laws, Senator Catherine Blakespear, is here with us today. But despite our progress, we're not spared from the pain and suffering inflicted by gun violence. We must keep fighting. We must keep organizing. We must keep doing better. Since joining the San Diego County Board of Supervisors, we have taken actions here in our county to do our part to make our community safer. We've banned ghost guns here in San Diego County and given our district attorney the power to pursue and hold accountable ghost gun distributors. We've passed safe storage legislation and required that all guns be safely stored in the unincorporated areas of the county. And we've trained county social workers to know the signs of gun violence in a home. And we have asked county council to pursue a lawsuit against reckless ghost gun manufacturers whose actions are profiting off the lives of our children. But it's still not enough. And the importance of regional leaders coming together cannot be overstated. When we unite as one, when we stand shoulder to shoulder, we can get so much more done. Our community and our advocates have been driving this work forward. I see so many partners here with us today. You are the boots on the ground. You're the ones doing the work. You're the ones calling and organizing and advocating and never resting and never letting your elected leaders rest either. So I just want to take a moment to thank everyone here today. Thank you for your leadership. Thank those who are in the chamber and those who are with us online. Thank you for all that you do. And I am just personally just so deeply grateful for your leadership and your inspiration in this movement and at this moment. So thank you all. So with that, I would like to, I think we have a video from Congressmember Mike Levin. Thank you all.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Congressman Mike Levin. I'm sorry that I couldn't be there in person. I'm currently in Washington, D.C. for votes and working to avoid a government shutdown. Thank you, Supervisor Lawson-Remer, for hosting this necessary and important discussion about the gun violence epidemic. And thank you to all the community leaders who are fighting for common sense measures to keep our communities safe. Over the last 7 years, firearms took the lives of 1,310 people in San Diego County. And across the country, widespread gun violence threatens our schools, our families, and our children every day. San Diegans know Congress isn't doing enough to stop the plague of gun violence. For far too long, Republicans in Congress have dragged their feet, refusing to take the serious action necessary to prevent these senseless tragedies. Finally, we're starting to see some progress. Last year, I helped pass the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first major federal gun violence prevention legislation in nearly 30 years. The bill funded states' red flag laws, closed the boyfriend loophole, strengthened background checks for buyers under 21 years old, and cracked down on gun trafficking and straw purchasing. It also funded community-based violence intervention programs, invested in mental health services, and funded school safety efforts. Just last week, we saw more meaningful progress. President Biden announced the establishment of a federal Office of Gun Violence Prevention, which will coordinate efforts across the federal government to ensure the bipartisan legislation we signed into law last year is implemented. But we cannot stop there. As a member of the House's Gun Violence Prevention Task Force, I know that there is so much more we can and must do to ensure our communities live without fear of a mass shooting. I believe we need measures that are much more ambitious, like a ban on assault weapons, and I'll continue working hard with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to pass legislation that makes our communities safer. As we work to prevent gun violence, it's important to remember that the successes we've had have not happened alone, and any future progress is only possible when we work together. That's why I'm grateful for everyone attending the summit today. Progress towards a safer San Diego would not be possible without your continued devotion and support. Thank you for all of your amazing work, and I hope to have the opportunity to speak with you in person soon. I hope you have a productive conversation.
Thank you, Congressman Levin. So panel one is about suicide prevention. We know that about 52% of all gun deaths in California are from suicide. And we also know that more than twice as many suicides by firearm occur in the states with the weakest gun laws. So what we do as a government and as a community really matters. So joining us for this panel to talk about suicide prevention is Dr. Luke Bergman, Director of County of San Diego's Behavioral Health Department, Dr. Heidi Kraft, the Chief Clinical Officer with the nonprofit Psych Armor, and Dr. Eric Rafla-Yuan, the Technical Advisor, California Office of Emergency Services. So please join me in welcoming them.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Lawson-Remer. It's a real pleasure to be here to speak to what is a sobering topic, of course. And I think important that we're leading off with a conversation about suicide. As the Vice Chair just noted, rates of suicide fatality associated with firearms are very high, right? And that they are the preponderance of deaths that come as a result of firearms generally. Some people find that surprising. That's a very important statistic, right? So suicide has to be an important part of this conversation. People may not know, at least as widely, that the preponderance of suicide fatalities are a result of firearms. So the preponderance of fatalities to do with firearms generally are suicides, and the preponderance of suicides generally are a result of firearms. That's true across the country, and that's also true in San Diego County. I think resonant with what the Vice Chair just noted, we have seen positive things with respect to suicide data in San Diego County recently. A modest kind of downward trend over the last couple of years, but this is a thing we need to remain very, very vigilant about, especially in the wake of the pandemic, where we would see kind of lagging indicators like suicide mortality showing up only in the years to come. A lot of what I want to make very clear in light of the data that I've just noted around the frequency of firearm use and involved in fatal suicides is that the means of suicide is really significant. And people may have heard this phrase, means matter. It's a phrase that I think was made kind of more famous and recognizable by a research institute on gun injury at Harvard. And I think it's a really important one for us to sort of carry with us and out of this conversation in the context of suicide generally, that means really do matter. Firearm is not the most common means of suicide attempt. So that's a very important thing for us to sort of also kind of sit with, right? It's just that it is by fathoms the most fatal means of suicide attempt, right? So we know generally that for every suicide fatality, we estimate that there are around 11 suicide attempts, right? For every single fatality, around 11 suicide attempts. Rates of fatality in cases of suicide attempt with a firearm are around 90%, right? And that 10%, of course, also leads often to very grave injury. Rates of suicide fatality with the other most common means of attempt, so and probably most common among those is poisoning, or intentional overdose, is around 1.5 to 3%. So it's a wild disparity, and really important that we sit with that, right? Relatively low rates of fatality when we look at all suicide attempts, and the means really impact the likelihood of fatality. 90% again of suicide attempts with a firearm result in fatality, and quite small rates of attempt through other means that are most common. And again, poisoning most important, result in fatality. Part of what that should mean for us when we take into account that the duration of contemplation of suicide before an attempt is made is actually much shorter than most people would anticipate. It's a much shorter duration of people intending to attempt suicide and actually carrying out that attempt than most people know. That means interrupting that period, interrupting access to means, could, looking at the data, be very impactful. That's part of why this conversation is so important in this space. There are lots of really interesting demographic dynamics around suicide attempt that are true across the country, but also very true in San Diego. We, of course, are a long-established military community. So rates of suicide among veterans is really, really important. I'm really excited to hear Dr. Kraft speak to that. And we're doing a lot to address it. And there are a lot of opportunities through forms of access that are new and especially expedient. And I'm really excited to hear Dr. Rafa Yuen speak to that as well. And so with that, I'll stop and hand it over to Heidi.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's always hard for me. It's always hard for me to talk about this because I am a veteran. I served in the Navy for almost 10 years. And I think much more than being a clinical psychologist, I'm a veteran. And many of us who wore our uniforms and many of us who have family members who have worn our uniforms have been impacted by suicide in our community in a way that is really hard to have to come face to face with every day. God bless you. So one of the greatest things, I think, about the ability to make change is to feel like one person at a time, one conversation at a time, we might be able to be part of the solution of this. And I realize that's kind of what today is about in a much larger scale. What our panel is about suicide. And then what my piece is really specifically around is about our military connected community. And here in San Diego, as Dr. Bergman said, that's a lot of us. We have over 115,000 active duty service members in San Diego and over 200,000 veterans. We are one of the highest populations of those people in our country by far. The other thing we know about my community that I love so very much is that we tend to die by suicide at higher rates than our civilian counterparts, much higher rates. So we know that this is now something that has to move forward with action. And so I have been very fortunate through my time on active duty as well as ever since to be part of groups that are trying to figure this out. And over the last couple of years, we've come up with some new ways of looking at this. And that's part of, I think, why I was asked to be here. We know a couple of really important things about our military connected community. We're a culture. We are a culture all our own. And we are a culture that's very familiar with firearms. We're very comfortable with them. We know how to use them. They are the sort of idea of the lethality of firearms is not theoretical for my community. We may have used them to survive. We may know someone that died of a gunshot wound. And we are probably different than a lot of other communities in that. We also die by suicide with firearms as the means at higher rates than civilians. This tends to be the means that my community chooses. So, what does that mean for us in the suicide prevention world in this community? We need to figure out how to use cultural awareness to be able to have conversations with our military connected people about their firearms and about keeping them safe when they are potentially going to be moving in and out of suicide crises. And your point is really well taken. These crises are short. That's what we've learned. We've had the opportunity now to speak to people who have survived suicide attempts, and we've learned from them how short they actually are. How temporary they are. And the very nature of that gives us the ability then to interrupt the crisis, to use Dr. Bergman's words. I like that word, actually. So in our military connected community, we realize now that it is more critical than ever that we are having conversations around the safe storage of firearms when we are concerned about a suicide crisis, period. Nothing that I just said is gray. That is a black and white discussion. And I think that where Psych Armor comes in and why I'm so very privileged to be part of this group is that we pride ourselves in education around military culture. That's what we do. We teach people how to connect with people in the military connected community, how to understand their culture well enough to have conversations. It's even more important now. So what Psych Armor does is we have a number of different trainings, and I think my colleague has brought some cards that are easy access to our online free training, narrated by some of our country's experts in suicide prevention in the military community. The idea is that every single one of us has the ability to have a meaningful conversation with a military connected person that you might be worried about. And every one of us should feel empowered to ask about the firearm in their home and how that weapon is secured. And then to have a collaborative discussion around, okay, what are we gonna do now that you are struggling so that we can keep you safe? And as a clinical psychologist who has taken care of many, many, many active duty members, these conversations are okay to have. They'll have them. They actually will talk about safety. Military people are good at safety. That's one of the things we're really good at. We kind of pride ourselves on that, right? So PsychArmor's goal, our whole mission right now, is to empower people to connect in a way that allows those conversations to start. And we believe that one person at a time, yes, healthcare providers are a major part of this. We want our community healthcare providers who are taking care of military connected people to feel comfortable having those conversations and to realize they are not political. They are about safety. But we are hoping now, thank you. We are hoping now that we can expand that past healthcare providers and that everyone sitting in this room and watching this video can hear me loud and clear. We can have these conversations. We can ask people that we're worried about planning with us, coming together and collaborating and coming up with a way to keep that weapon secure. And we believe that can interrupt suicide crises and save lives. So on behalf of PsychArmor, thank you so much for having me here. I'm very pleased to be here with my esteemed colleagues, and I think together we all move forward in a concerted effort to make a difference.
Good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Eric Rothleon. I'm a psychiatrist. I take care of folks when they come to the emergency room. I do that both at our San Diego County Psychiatric Hospital as well as at the VA Medical Center in La Jolla. And suicide is like a really serious and scary thing, both for the folks who are having the crisis as well as their families and loved ones who are struggling to figure out what to do. And as we have this discussion, it's important to acknowledge two really sobering facts. So one, suicide is the leading cause of gun-related death in this country. And the CDC recently released its statistics showing that in 2022, more people died by suicide than in any other year in American history. So it's a growing issue. And these are shocking statistics and often not what people think about when they think about gun violence and gun violence prevention. So I really appreciate Supervisor Lawson-Remer's attention to this today. And I also wanted to take a few minutes to make sure that we're all aware of resources out there, and one of them being 988. And so 988 is a new 3-digit hotline for mental health crises and suicide prevention. It's free and available 24/7 in all 50 states and actually in American territories abroad as well. It is accessible by dialing traditionally, like on a cell phone or a landline, but you can also directly text to 988 or access 988 online at 988lifeline.org or 988.gov. I just want to take a moment and say that that texting feature has been really important for young people. The majority of folks who reach out via texting are under the age of 24. And so people want to know what happens when you reach out to 988, like who's answering those calls. And so on the other end of the line is a trained crisis counselor that sits in one of the many kind of crisis call centers we have across the country. So there are 12 that answer the calls for 988 in California, and we're lucky to have one here in San Diego that the county helps support. And so these counselors are able to kind of stabilize that immediate emergency, kind of provide support over the phone and figure out what next steps might be. You can also call if you're worried about someone else. It doesn't just have to be about you. And in some cases, they're able to dispatch a mobile crisis team. And so these teams are teams of mental health professionals, which can respond and kind of help support the person wherever they are, whether that's at home, at school, at the workplace, if they're at a store. And so another thing is that 988 is accessible in multiple languages, as well as American Sign Language. And if you're trying to reach the Veterans Crisis Line, the way to do that now as well as call or text 988. And that way, folks who want to talk to a counselor who's specialized in providing support to veterans can do that. And people want to know, is 988 being used? Do people know about it? And so the answer is like a resounding yes. So since its launch in July of last year, more than 6 million people have reached out through the combination of calls, text, and online chat. We're seeing significant use here in California as well. Our call centers here in California are getting more calls than any other state. In fact, more than 26 other states combined. And even with this call volume, wait times are pretty good. So it only takes about 30 seconds to get connected to a counselor. And when you think about the months and months it might take to get an appointment, this is sometimes kind of the only thing that people can get, and to be able to get it in that kind of time is amazing. And so we're really fortunate that our elected leaders in Sacramento and here at the county, their board of supervisors and our agency leaders have really been working to integrate this and implement it to make sure that it's accessible for everybody. And another example of leadership, a bill recently was passed in Sacramento and signed by Newsom, which requires 988 information to be posted everywhere that guns are being sold. And so I'm really glad that we have this resource, and hope that if you or a loved one needs help in a crisis, remember that 988 is free. It's accessible 24/7 everywhere by call, text, and chat, and that hope is there. Thank you.
We have about another 2 minutes if anyone has additional thoughts or comments to share among our panelists.
I will maybe just amplify a couple of the points that that Dr. Ruffalo, you just made, and that Dr. Kraft made as well, but they're very related here. One of the things that we really want to sort of make clear as a call to action is that we need to talk more. That simple conversation, simple inquiry is incredibly effective, right? Heidi and I were using the word interrupted before. Talk can be that kind of interruption. And so we encourage people to proactively solicit that kind of conversation. And of course, we encourage people to seek it out when they are feeling in the midst of crisis. And if you don't have someone to talk to, call 988. You don't have to feel necessarily that you're in a state of crisis, but if you are feeling like you want to talk to someone about your mental well-being, call 988. Another feature of the Access and Crisis Line call center that we have here in San Diego is that it will actually be a resource for connecting you to ongoing care. So you can get in the moment stabilization services, but then you can also get immediately connected to ongoing care, which is a really, really valuable, I think, facet of this. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Can we give our panelists a round of applause? I found that very interesting. One of the statistics that really struck me was about how much means really does matter. That as Luke Bergman was mentioning, that 90% of attempts at suicide with a firearm are successful. And I think he said around 2% or less with poisoning are successful. And that is just so compelling, that if we can prevent someone who's contemplating suicide from getting their hands on a firearm, that can really make the difference between someone living and dying, the difference between 90% and 2%, which is truly extraordinary. So anyway, just wanted to share those are some of the things that I took away from that panel. So coming up next, we have panel 2, which is about community-driven peace work. And I really just want to take a moment to recognize the power that lies in our communities, that real change has to be led by impacted individuals. And that's the core of community-driven peace work. It's a testament to the understanding that effective solutions to our problems emanate from those most immediately affected by those issues. So I am honored to introduce Council President Pro Tem Monica Montgomery Stepp, and who with Bishop Cornelius Bowser will be leading our discussion on community-driven peace work. Monica is a fierce advocate, and her dedication to the betterment of our community, her tireless advocacy for reducing gun violence, is why she is here with us today. So with that, can we please welcome Monica Montgomery Steppe, and Bishop Cornelius Bowser.
Well, hello, everyone. Supervisor, thank you so much for the introduction. And thank you everyone for being here on this very important day where we get to really come together and discuss different aspects of gun violence. So as mentioned, I'm Monica Montgomery Steppe. I represent Council District 4 in the city of San Diego, where I grew up. And I understand that violence interruption through a community approach, it's extremely dear to my heart, as it has been the core of my approach to serving my community and all of San Diego in this position. In 2019, right upon me entering office, the city of San Diego saw a rash of gun violence that impacted each and every community. Murders had increased by nearly 43% compared to the previous year. And so we know that violence makes our residents feel unsafe, and it creates a negative stigma among our neighborhoods and longstanding trauma for every community member. I believed then, and I believe now, that it's my responsibility as an elected official to invest intentionally in what the community had been volunteering to do for years in a call for peace. And so San Diego has many organizations that do this work. One of them is a Community Assistance Support Team, or CAST, which provides real-time support for people who experience violence to prevent retaliatory violence. Having this type of street outreach with trusted, credible messengers and violence interrupters makes an actual difference with community members and builds bridges of trust between community and law enforcement. Knowing that we have these types of credible messengers and their programs that didn't formally exist in our system, I launched the peace movement, Let's Live, Let's Love, as a proactive and holistic approach that includes short and long-term goals. So our short-term goals were, in that moment, we were experiencing that rash of violence. And so one of the short-term goals was to tamp down that violence and to promote unity and healing and peace in San Diego communities. We held some healing circles and workshops among community leaders to understand what we could do more to help the people while we serve and while we were trying to promote peace in our communities. And the pandemic did stop some of that work. We had started it immediately prior to shutting down. And so we couldn't move forward in that same way, but we did move forward with some of our long-term goals. And that was to provide policy solutions that promote economic justice, to foster improved community and police relations, and to improve the overall quality of life for all of San Diegans. So we really wanted to cement in our very system this community approach, which had not occurred before in a real way, especially when we were talking about our budgets. So, we could approach economic justice in so many ways. It could be ensuring that people have access to jobs that pay livable wages, investing in first-time homebuyer programs, connecting folks with resources and the tools needed as an integral component of the peace movement. I also advocated for a city contract that would launch the No Shots Fired pilot intervention and prevention program, which is a community street outreach and intervention program that could provide wraparound services to encourage gang members in particular to exit that life and ultimately drive peace among rivalries in our communities. Peace work cannot and will not be completed without working with the community. Really, this program for me was just that, a pilot, so that we could show the progress and we could also begin to invest in other community groups and members to do this type of work in other spaces. So if we want any chance to heal and keep this community in America's safest city, we have to find a way to work together. That includes, again, community groups, elected officials. It also includes community policing. It is truly a part of what I call the public safety ecosystem. And I talk about that a lot. I know Ariel's gonna stop me when I at 2 minutes. Oh, okay. I thought I had less than that. Okay. So when we recognize public safety as a system of interconnected pieces interacting with one another, we highlight those moving pieces of the structure that keep our community safe and thriving. We need proactive measures along with a lot of the reactive measures that law enforcement provides. I believe many of those proactive measures need to come from our community members and organizations. A large component to creating solutions to community violence including full engagement with the leadership of local stakeholders. And we really can't do this without each other. And plenty of other cities like Philadelphia and Richmond, California, and New York have these models to address gun violence in our communities. Evidence shows that this program is also working in San Diego as it relates to gang violence. The San Diego Police Department reported in their 2022 crime statistics that gang homicides decreased 65% year over year from 2021 through the year of 2021. We can't get positive solutions without proper dialogue, building trust, forging meaningful and genuine relationships with our community. And I'm really proud to have built a relationship with the co-founder of CAS and a critical leader of No Shots Fired to make sure we continue genuine relationships with our community. And that would be none other than Bishop Bowser, who I will pass the mic over to now. Thank you.
Thank you, Pro Tem Step, and thank you, County Board of Supervisor Remer, for this summit here. The work that we do, as Pro Tem Step said, I am the co-founder of CAS and also Director of Shafat Outreach, which leads the No Shots Fired program that is a system within the city now, and we really appreciate that. CAS, we started CAS about in 2012. It started as an ad hoc out of the San Diego Commission for Gang Prevention Intervention. And our goal was to get out front, get ahead of the violence versus waiting for a shooting to happen and then have a visual and so on. We want to get out front. So we built a coalition, a collaborative effort. It is, I see some of our partners out there, San Diego for Gun Violence Prevention, which also includes Moms Demand Action and the Brady Campaign. We also have collaborate with, I see some UPAC members out there, UPAC. I saw Brian Malty in the back, even though he's not here, exactly here in San Diego with Hope and Heal Foundation. He's been a great support to us also in the work that we do in trying to prevent gun violence from happening in the first place as it relates to community gun violence. Our target audience or population, I should say, is gangs. One of the things that we looked at, as you heard some of the data here, is that, you know, when you look at gang homicides, 100% of those homicides, the weapon of choice was a gun. Not only 100% of those homicides when it's gang related were homicides, but when you look at the demographics, 67% of those gang homicides were Black individuals. And so we saw a great need to not only disrupt the violence that's happening, but prevent it from happening in the future. So we get out into community, we do street outreach. We reach out to those individuals that we know that are possibly engaged and involved in the violence. One of our goals is to work with them, as Pro Tem Step mentioned. They have a lot of needs, right? I can give you an example. There was a young man that got shot, and when I went to the hospital and was doing an assessment, in the hospital, the nurse was also doing an assessment. Found out that he was suicidal, he was homeless, sleeping in his car, he needed employment, and he had a slew of other issues that they're dealing with when it comes to trauma. And so what we do is we do an assessment of that and connect them with the needed resources, whether it's counseling or whether it's employment and so on. I mentioned UPAC. A lot of times when there's a shooting out there and there's blood everywhere and bullet holes everywhere, we call on UPAC, and they basically send in a team to pay to get the bullets cleaned up, the blood cleaned up, and the bullets patched, bullet holes patched up, and so on. And so we work as a team, and it's a collaborative effort. One of the things that I always say is that not one organization or one person can take the credit for the reduction of gun violence, but it's all of us coming together and work together, playing our role, which includes law enforcement. I'm really appreciative of our relationship that we have with them from the perspective of creating this system that Pro Tem Step helped us to do, because now there is a direct communication line between us so that when there are shootings or something about to happen, we can, they'll reach out to us or we can reach out to them. I can give you an example. There was a young man that got killed and his homeboys were having a memorial in front of some apartments complex, but the residents in the apartment complex called the police because they were saying that these individuals were blocking their pathway, getting into their homes, shooting guns late at night, and so on. So what we did, and we dispatched our team out there and talked to the residents, but also engaged the individuals to ask them, number one, to move their memorial, and then number two, to stop the shootings and so on. And they listened, and eventually it died down and it stopped. So those are, besides the disrupting the violence in the community, besides getting out to the hospitals when someone is shot, we also work at trying to prevent violence from happening. So we also have a gun diversion program where we use the curriculum that is verbal and expressive writing. There's 3 approaches to it. One approach is dealing with motivational interviewing, the trans-theoretical model of change, and CBT. This helps these individuals to change their thinking and their mindset. Not only that, but we work and connect with individuals that are the young men that are in prison to work with them. I get calls throughout the week because calls are free now in prison, and so I get a lot of calls from these individuals and able to work with them even while they're in prison to get them to fall back from the gangs and get them ready for when they're getting ready to get out, so that they have the proper support that they need and the right kind of mindset to really, when they get into community, be productive rather than destructive in our communities and so on. So I'm really appreciative the system that was set up with the No Shots Fired program. Am I out of time? Thank you. Well, I'm out of time. I tell you got to stop me because I'll keep talking. Thank you, Ariana.
No worries. Definitely thank both of you for all of the work that you do to collaborate with the community and making sure that we bring solutions to the table when it comes to gun violence.
Yes.
We do have just 2 questions that I wanted to ask, and I'll actually start with Bishop to answer the first one. What are some of the challenges of building successful community violence intervention programs such as No Shots Fired and what you've done with CAS? What are some of the barriers that you kind of come across within the community and other spaces?
Well, for sure, the lack of resources when you talk about being able to sustain your organization, building capacity. One thing we're most definitely appreciative of is the city stepping forward and providing some funding resources for us, and also SBCS, South Bay Community Services, which is one of our fiscal agents, huge organization, been around for years and years and years and years, but they really work with us to build capacity within the organization, so that, because a lot of times we just see what we do in the community, but don't see the administrative, the business aspect of the work in collecting data, making sure that we can show proper outcomes and so on. So I would say the challenge is in this work is us having more support like that to help us to really build the capacity that we need to be around 10 years from now, right? Not just 2 years, 6 months or what have you, but and that's why I really appreciate Pro Tem Step and what she's doing, institutionalizing this work that we're doing, and we professionalize it. We are certified in the work that we do, and so I've been properly trained by the best in the nation, or I should say in the world, because he's international and so on. So really appreciate that. Appreciate Council President Elo, who also stepped forward and supporting us in this work. And we just need more support. We need more support. We need more resources so that we can build that capacity and be sustainable for a long time.
Absolutely. And I don't know if Council President Pro Tem, you wanted to go to that question or to go to the next. We are happy to do both.
Just real quick, the challenge is just within the system is that although this work is not foreign to community, the advocacy within institutionalizing these programs and making them not just programs, but a part of the overall system is foreign to our government structure overall. So the advocacy is super important, and the knowledge of the system is super important so that you can understand kind of what questions to ask, where to begin in the process. I know Bishop and many, many others, and even many of you in this room have been doing this kind of work for decades. And we, I was a staffer maybe 10 years ago, and we were talking about how do we institutionalize these types of programs. And it happened, a couple of years ago, right? So it shouldn't take that long. And we are, propping this program up to show success that we can go and do things, alternative methods to policing when it comes to solutions around gun violence and community violence. But it does kind of take a lot of advocacy. It takes, a lot of knowledge. My staff members are very knowledgeable about the system and where we can advocate when and what for specifically. When we leave this summer, there's step-by-step processes, right, that we should engage in beginning now. Our budget memos at the city were due yesterday, right? And so in that, we include these types of things and walk them through the system. And that is the challenge because, sometimes the community we may need to engage on like what we're actually doing because it's not all upfront all the time. There's a lot of work behind the scenes that has to go into creating these types of programs.
Thank you so much. We've reached a time barrier, so thank you both.
I think we have now another video from Congressmember Sarah Jacobs. Yep, that was fascinating, and I just really appreciated getting an insight into some of the work that our community groups are leading on the ground. So thank you.
You in person, but thank you to Hi everyone.
So apparently we're having some technical challenges from Washington. So we're going to hear from Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs after this panel. So our next panel is focused on protecting children, and we're going to be talking about strategies to protect the youngest members of our society, focusing on the accountability of gun owners and on parents. And I think about this all the time as a mom. I think all the time about sending my kid to a play date and what would happen if there's a loaded gun lying around the house unlocked, right? And we know that so many tragedies unfold in exactly that way. And that was one of the reasons why moving forward, safe storage legislation here in San Diego County was one of my top priorities, because it's just so important to protect kiddos who otherwise could be the victims of a real tragedy. And I'm just excited to welcome such a great set of panelists, beginning with Senator Catherine Blakespear. In her, I think, first year, she hasn't been up there very long. I feel like I just voted for her. She wrote 2 bills two pieces of legislation that actually passed and were signed into law, which represents a really significant step forward in terms of gun safety legislation here in California. We also have April Lassiter, the CEO of Open Hearts Leaders, and Teresa Heimer from San Diegans for Gun Violence Prevention, and Colleen Crichton representing Brady United. Everyone here today are people who are inspirations to me and tireless advocates and have done so much. So please join me in welcoming them to our panel.
Okay, well, thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Senator Catherine Blakespear, and I want to start by thanking Supervisor Lawson-Remer for convening this panel, hosting this summit, and inviting me to participate. I'm honored to be here amongst people who are similarly dedicated to reducing gun violence. I love seeing the Never Again and Moms Demand Action shirts in the audience. People in those shirts come up to Sacramento, and it's very important and impactful. And I just want to say thank you for showing up. During my first year as a state senator, I made gun violence prevention a priority, just as I had done during my 6 years as Encinitas mayor. And I'm wearing my orange and this little pin as a reflection of that commitment here today. So just this week, as the supervisor mentioned, the governor has signed 2 of my gun violence prevention bills, and one of them requires guns to be micro-stamped. So this will tie the bullet to the gun it came from, which will help law enforcement solve crimes. And the second one requires gun stores to post notices in their stores about the dangers of having a weapon in the home, and also posting a suicide prevention number. Today, I was asked to define the law around weapons in the home and why safe storage is important. And I'll do that and then address areas where safe storage laws can be bolstered by new ways of thinking. So first, I just want to start with that simple question of why is safe storage important? Why does it really matter? And I think it's important to remember that safe storage matters because it recognizes the reality that we live with in this country, which is that guns are in wide circulation. We may wish that that was different and that we had the ability to change that, but at this point, we really do not. So recognizing that there are more guns than people here in the United States, there are more gun dealers than McDonald's. We have 6 Supreme Court justices and many district court justices, including an infamous one right here in San Diego, that do not understand the plain meaning of the words well-regulated militia. And so what that means is that we need to make guns that are in wide circulation safer. And requiring that guns be safely stored recognizes that they're here and says, what can we do as a harm reduction and public health approach to make that widespread gun ownership safer? So having a baseline of safe storage for everybody is an important goal. It reduces the unintended access to guns by people who should not have them, like children. Safe storage is a barrier to one of the primary drivers of gun deaths, and that is impulse. So impulse is what can turn a domestic dispute deadly when a gun is involved. Impulse is what makes a mental health break fatal when a gun is involved. And impulses are a big part of why you are 50% more likely to die from being shot if you live with a gun in California. So over 50% of gun deaths in California are actually suicides, and people who are having suicidal thoughts don't need to die from that. In San Diego, that number is actually over 70%. So we can and do need to do more. And recognizing that only 1/3 of gun owners in California who live with children store their guns safely. So that's only 1/3 of gun owners who live with children store their guns safely. You know that anybody who brings a gun to a school, that gun is de facto not stored safely because there's no reason that a child should be able to bring a gun to school. So new ways of thinking about how we can address safe storage include a gun safety bill that I introduced within minutes of being sworn in, SB 8, which requires gun owners to have liability insurance. In this country, we manage all risk through insurance. So we insure everything from homes and cars to obscure things like body parts. If Bruce Springsteen can insure his vocal cords, it makes us wonder why we don't have a functioning insurance market around the risks that guns pose to our health and safety. Gun insurance requirements would promote safe storage. And that is just like drivers are rewarded with lower car insurance rates for safe driving. Responsible gun owners would be rewarded for safely storing their guns. And you can see why this would work. Insurance companies with 81 million customers would have a financial interest in reducing gun violence because then they wouldn't have to be paying out claims. People would get that incentive to go and lock up the gun and or have it in a safe. So the society and the victims of gun violence are the ones who are currently footing the entire $300 billion cost of gun violence. And having the insurance industry involved in that would shift that burden. So unfortunately, my SB 8 has not gotten a lot of support yet. It was officially opposed by the insurance industry, which in a way is odd because it's a market. But I'm keeping SB 8 alive because I remain hopeful that more people like the ones who are here in this room will get behind it. Because the hard truth is that until we have a strong financial motive behind reducing gun violence, we are just not going to make the kind of progress that we need. But there are some things we can do right now that will make a difference. So new ways of thinking involve meeting people where they are. After a mass shooting in Maryland, the state of Maryland started to think about gun violence as a public health problem. And they found a surprising partner in libraries. So putting gun locks at public libraries, people could get them with no questions asked. And over a couple months, we have over 2,000 gun locks that were taken from libraries. Another important community partner is hospitals, so the hospital interventions. Studies have shown that 1 in 6 gunshot victims are shot again in the decade that follows. So meeting people in the hospital right after they've been shot with trusted partners like the bishop who was sitting up here before, that means that we could interrupt those cycles of violence. So I know that I'm almost out of time here, and I have tailored my remarks to not run over time because I like to be respectful of the rules. But we want to have that world where we can drop our kids at school, where pastors and librarians and doctors are our trusted ambassadors and community leaders, and where we can do everything we can to live safely. So thank you very much for the opportunity today. It's great to talk to you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Supervisor Terra Lawson-Remer. My name is April Astor. I'm the CEO and founder of Open Heart Leaders and the Executive Director of Heart Leaders Academy. I am here today to discuss the importance of diversifying communication tactics, specifically also in communities of color. I don't know if everybody noticed, but I'm a little browner than a lot of people in here, and that's okay. But I say that in a joking manner, but I say it in a serious manner. When we talk about protecting our children, we also have to remember how are we communicating the laws and the advocacy around gun protection and gun violence in all communities. Gun violence affects us at an alarming rate in marginalized communities because as to other communities buy guns for protection, we buy them also. We have them out of fear and protection to the opposing side. And I say that so candidly. We have to remember when we are producing any type of information in communities, specifically those who have been specifically harmed by gun violence, we have to remember cultural sensitivity. We have to also engage in trust. And then I want to also talk about addressing stereotypes. The definition of gun violence can mean different for someone living in Coronado versus someone who's south of the 8 that lives in southeastern San Diego. So how we define gun violence also should play a part in how policies and legislation affects the rules that are in place. When we speak about our children and having the safe locks and the storage, that information is often lost in translation by the time it reaches most of the communities that I serve here in the county of San Diego. By engaging and empowering community-based orgs and leaders who do this boots to pavement work, that actually deal in the mentoring programs, that deal with the after-school programs, that deal with the on-hand engagement with kids in our communities of all different colors, background, race, and religion, you will notice that typically when that gained trust is earned from our children, you'll get a faster response in how we are dealing with trauma. You get tailored solution because remember, those who are traumatized most will often tell you what they need to fix their trauma. But if we don't listen and we drown them out, we are spinning our wheels in circles by listening to people who never have stepped foot in the neighborhoods who are ultimately affected by gun violence, make decisions on how we should address gun violence. Long-term healing needs to be in effect, and that comes with supporting mental health institutions and programs and services that get to the root cause issue. We can't just look at the trunk of the tree. We have to look at the roots and the fruit that's bearing from the tree. Building a resilience is very important to me because it involves local leaders and organizations in the response, shootings, communities, and we can build the resilience. We learn how to support each other during crisis and become better prepared responding to our future challenges, especially with our kids. Trauma lives on. When you experience something at a young age, it doesn't go away. I want to also end on my call to action because I know but we have to advocate for more comprehensive gun safety measures. And advocating for that means supporting research, getting accurate data from all different demographic angles of the world and areas. Remember, protecting our children should not be a divisive issue. It is a shared responsibility that transcends political boundaries. Again, it is a shared responsibility that transcends political boundaries. Addressing the root cause of gun violence while upholding our fundamental rights should not be an issue, but will always be an issue if our definitions differ of how we experience it. We cannot say we are here to protect the future of our children when we cannot pass specific legislation that does that. So I am big on accountability. And so I was invited here today because I speak truth to power and I always will. Purple hair and teal hair and everything, I'm here to let you know that I'm going to hold our politicians accountable in making sure that these specific gun laws pass, because never in my life have I seen an AR-15 used to hunt a deer, but I have seen it kill many of our children. I have seen it kill many of the people that I love and I serve here in this community. Thank you for my time.
The call came from my parents when I was a young adult. Richard, who had been like an uncle to me, had died by firearm suicide. Richard was ill, and the extremely fatal means of a gun in his household meant that his suicidal ideation ended his life. This kind, loving man was gone. This was far too familiar and shocking an event for me. Years before, a boy at my high school had taken his life with his family's hunting rifle after breaking up with his girlfriend. I am Therese Heimer, a volunteer with San Diegans for Gun Violence Prevention. We are a coalition of national and local organizations that advocate and educate in the fight to end gun violence. These two men, one older and one still a teen, are part of the reason why I do this work to prevent more needless deaths. As happened with my high school classmate, unsecured guns in the household can lead to devastating results. Teen suicides are rising, and guns in the home are a particular risk. Young children find unsecured firearms, as happened in Fallbrook this summer when a 3-year-old shot and unintentionally killed their 1-year-old sibling. Unlocked guns can be easily stolen, then going on to become guns in crimes. And we know that 75% of the time, school shooters obtain the guns they use from their homes or those of close friends or relatives. So having safe storage laws is important. But how do people know about the laws, the risks, the need to lock their guns? As April discussed, we need to consider diverse approaches to getting the word out so that people can protect their families. One of the most important means of reaching many families is through our schools. That is why California passed a law that now requires all school districts to notify families at least once a year about safe firearm storage. And yet seeing that notice once with a stack of other papers as the kids return to school in the fall is just a first step. Studies show that as adults, we need to be taught a fact 7 times before we learn it, 7 times. So we decided to provide school districts with more information and tools so the message can be repeated in various ways over the course of a school year. We created a safe storage toolkit for school districts. We have circulated it broadly among the more than 40 school districts in our county, and it is available to all for free on the sd4gvp.org website. The toolkit gives schools means to continue that messaging, including simple language to explain our local laws to families, which are much broader than California law, an information sheet for parents, how to ask if there is an unsecured gun before your child goes to a friend's house, social media templates, content ideas for school websites, and information to host events. I end with a request for action by each of you. Pull up our toolkit, send it to families that you know, point them to the tools and resources section of the toolkit for information they can use personally. Take the toolkit to your child's school. Talk to the principal about a training for their PTA or the resources to send out social media or other information to their families. What other places can use this same resource? What about your church or a local club perhaps? Each of you can be a hero, a link in the chain to teach every gun owner that they can save lives by the simple act of locking up their guns. And now I'll pass it to Colleen, who's here virtually with us.
Thank you. And I just want to commend everybody here in the audience for all the critical work that you're doing, especially hearing, both suicide, unintentional injury, and all the lives being saved by all of your efforts. I come to Brady actually from the suicide space, where I was CEO of the American Association for Suicidology, and I was part of the team that actually took 988 from concept to reality. So see the fact that, it's doing well, that you're also coupling it with such critical safe storage means and laws is amazing. But a little bit about End Family Fire, which I'll talk about today in my remarks. We all know what we're up against. We heard the 75% school shootings. 4.6 million kids in the US live in a house with an unsafely stored gun. We lose 8 children a day to unintentional injury and shootings within the home. We also lose 67 individuals each and every day to firearm suicide in this country. And I've been with Brady for about a year, a little over a year, and that number's increased twice within the time I've been at Brady. I started, it was 63, and a little over a year later, we lose 4 more people each and every day. We also know that access to a firearm increases the risk of suicide 300%. So we know, when someone's in crisis, having easy access to their firearm is not a good thing. And by putting just some sort of a barrier in between them and their lethality of the firearm could save their life. So a little bit about End Family Fire. In 2018, we looked at the issue with gun violence and all the lives lost. And we said, how do we take a cut at this? What can we do? And we met with the Ad Council, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Smokey the Bear, and a lot of other national campaigns. And Ad Council's advice was, in order to effectively treat the problem, give it a name, give it a term, secondhand smoke, designated driver, let's give it a term. So what we did is we tested out family fire, which means an unintentional or an injury in the home by a shooting, someone having access to a gun they shouldn't have. And so that can be unintentional injury, suicide. It's a death or injury resulting from gun violence. It's a little play off the term family fire. And so what we did in 2018, we launched on 8/8/18, and that was in homage to the 8 kids a day that were taken by family fire across the country. Now, when we work with Ad Council, the other thing to note is that 12 to 18 months of research goes into each and every one of our campaigns. So what they do is they pull in expert panels, they pull in creative review teams, and then for that entire term, quantitative, qualitative research goes into it. So that when it comes out, we know before we launch any campaign that we know it's going to resonate well with the audience and that it's going to have an impact. What we did after 2018, we launched, it was unintentional injury. And we can send these links around to everybody later, but it's called Justin, and it shows a kid in the home. A lot of the kids are smarter than a lot of the parents may think, in that they know where the guns are. They go sampling, and they go, looking around for the gun. We've since done suicide. 2021, we launched Service Never Stops for veterans. And then this past year, we launched Safe Stories and Misuse. And Safe Stories is really telling the story from the individual impacted by this of how safe storage saved my life. And again, if you go to endfamilyfire.org, you can see those. And the final comment is just, the impact of these videos. Anyone who sees the video after they see it, 140% more likely to express concern about a gun in the home. They're 48% more likely to change where they keep the gun, and 310% more likely, and they seek out more information about safe storage. So again, all of this is free to use to anybody who wants it. You can find them on our endfamilyfire.org site. We'd love to get these out to as many people as possible to help save lives.
You have about 3 more minutes if anyone else has any additional thoughts or comments to share, comments on any of the other speakers. If not, I have a couple things, but go ahead, please, Teresa.
No additional thoughts. I just thought we were going to be able to show one of the PSAs. Is that not happening? Great, thank you.
Let me just comment, I think, on one item. I just want to say I am very interested, Senator Blakespear, in this as an economist and an attorney, how you would create market incentives around, better practices for gun owners, and the gun liability and insurance issue seems really, really interesting. So I appreciate that, although that you didn't get a lot of take up this time, hopefully you will be able to organize more support from your colleagues moving forward. I think there's a lot to be said of how we can create more incentives to be a better steward.
Thank you. If I could just say a few words about this. So the idea of gun insurance is, I didn't come up with it. I read it in an article about the different things we could do to make gun ownership safer. It was many years ago. And I started to explore that a little bit. The city of San Jose has a requirement for anybody who owns a gun in the city of San Jose has to have an insurance policy. And so it is being tried. It is caught up in court, that requirement. But one of the issues is a lack of consensus from gun safety groups about this being a high priority. So I think it is acknowledged as potentially a game changer to have guns, anyone who owns a gun have to own an insurance policy, just like your car. You can't drive a car in California, own a car, and unless it's insured. So recognizing that guns are more dangerous than cars, and cars have become safer in part because of their insurance requirement. I think applying all those same things to guns really makes sense. But there are a lot of issues around, does it cover only accidental shootings or intentional shootings and accidental? And what about the home and the relationship with home insurance? So I understand the complexities, but I think what's necessary is the leadership of the really important gun safety groups have to be behind legislation like this in order for legislators like me and my colleagues to think that it's important. Because when there's a really split opinion, then it's harder for it to move forward. So I do think that's some of the harder work that needs to be done, maybe more behind the scenes, working out what exactly is the ask around safe storage, around gun insurance and safe storage.
And the core kind of theory is that you're going to have lower or almost non-existent insurance rates if you're storing your gun safely and taking appropriate precautions. So it creates incentives for gun owners to be responsible because then they have lower insurance rates.
Sorry.
Okay, that's very interesting. So thank you for sharing, and thank you for already offering 2 bills. Thank you. So with that, I think, are we ready to share the video from Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs? Thank you.
I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but thank you to Supervisor Terra Lawson-Remer and San Diegans for Gun Violence Prevention for organizing today's summit. I'm a member of the Columbine generation. My generation was the first to grow up in the shadow of gun violence. We had to learn how to hide from a potential shooter in school lockdown drills and come to grips with the fact that places that should be safe, like schools, grocery stores, synagogues, and our streets, just aren't. And I am heartbroken and infuriated that we are knowingly passing this trauma on to the next generations by failing to act on gun violence. And this trauma is growing exponentially. Gun violence is the #1 killer of kids and teens, more than car accidents, COVID-19, or anything else. And just this year, and it's only September, more than 500 people have already been killed in mass shootings. So summits like today's are incredibly important because we can't let our country become numb to gun violence. We've all watched the news too many times and seen kids being escorted out of classrooms with their hands raised or jumping out of classroom windows or sobbing in the aftermath. None of this is normal, and yet it's become routine now. We go through the same motions of wall-to-wall TV coverage, thoughts and prayers, and then take no action. We go back to our everyday lives without putting in the necessary and life-saving measures we need to keep our communities and our kids safe. And I know that I speak for my generation and the ones after us when I say that we can't take this anymore. Thanks to the work of so many of you, we were able to pass the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the most significant gun safety legislation in 30 years, almost my entire lifetime. And while it's not enough, it shows that progress is possible. And that's why we need to keep pushing to reinstate the assault weapons ban, strengthen federal background checks, and close loopholes that allow dangerous people to get guns. This is a big focus for Congress's Gun Violence Prevention Task Force, which I'm a member of. We are fighting hard to hold Republicans accountable for putting the NRA and their blood money before saving kids' lives. In fact, during Gun Violence Prevention Month in June, we pushed a few discharge petitions, which are procedural moves that allow us to bring bills to the floor that have significant support even if leadership doesn't support them. Our discharge petitions tried to pass common sense policies, like the assault weapons ban and expanded background checks. But unfortunately, we couldn't get just 5 Republicans to support them, which is what we needed to trigger a House floor vote. But that doesn't mean we're giving up. We will never give up. And that's because we know that our efforts could prevent the next school shooting. It could prevent parents from having to say their final goodbyes to their children. It could prevent the trauma we are knowingly passing on to the next generations. And it would prevent the never-ending what ifs, if onlys, and what could have beens when thinking about the loved ones we've lost. So we will never give up, and I know that none of you will either. I am so grateful for your leadership and everything that you're doing in our communities to keep all of us safe. It is such an honor to be doing this work alongside all of you. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great summit.
So our final panel before our keynote is focused on the firearms industry. And, you know, one thing I think a lot about is the power of litigation as a tool for social change. And I was very inspired when last year the families of 9 Sandy Hook victims, they were able to settle a lawsuit for $73 million against Remington. It was really a groundbreaking lawsuit establishing a lot more legal liability and I think putting gun manufacturers on notice. So I'm very honored that our San Diego City Attorney, Maura Elliott, who's been such a trailblazer in trying to create accountability here in San Diego County for gun manufacturers, is here with us today. And I think, Maura, you have been on the front line in so many of initiatives. I'm just really grateful for your leadership. And I know we would not have been able to do a lot of what we've done at the county if we weren't building on the work that you have pioneered at the city. So thank you for that. I also want to thank Councilmember Monty Von Wilpert. Also, I know you've been so tireless in fighting for gun violence and reduction and gun safety. And I, was very proud that we could follow your lead with the work you did on ghost guns and safe storage, and we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. We could scale up really thoughtful legislation that you guys had pioneered at the city. So thank you for that. And also, thank you so much for Assemblymember Chris Ward being here, who's serving as a moderator and will help us connect the issues that we're engaging with locally with the issues we're engaging on Sacramento, and as well as Ari Freelick, the director of DOJ's Office of Gun Violence Prevention. So Thank you all. And with that, I want to turn the panel over to our moderator.
Well, thank you, Supervisor Lawson-Remer. It is wonderful to be with you all. I know you've covered a lot of ground here today. And so for this last panel to talk about holding the firearm industry accountable, we're really grateful to be here as part of the Gun Violence Reduction Summit. I want to thank you for your leadership as a county official to bring us all together, because it's going to take all of us out in the community and at all levels of government to be responsive and help to keep our communities safe. We want to thank our Attorney General, who I know will be hopefully joining us after this as well, for some remarks and for his leadership to be able to provide statewide support as an ally in our fight to reduce gun violence. Earlier this summer, the legislature passed the state budget, which really keeps high, even during difficult budget times, the need to make sure that a lot of our important programs and efforts are fully funded to be able to support our communities. Amongst those are dollars that are going out to be able to help fund firearms dealer inspections, to process some firearm manufacturer applications, to working on some dealer requirements. And importantly, you might hear a little bit today about Assembly Bill 1594 that is literally going to hold the gun industry accountable for the harms caused by their products, the liability that they should be incurring when they breach California's gun safety laws as well. And of course, that's going to take education and support for those at all levels of government to be able to implement effectively. I'm particularly thankful for that because it was a bill that I helped to co-author. But I'm proud to introduce some of our panelists, leaders in the gun violence reduction space, and I will begin with City Attorney Mara Elliott. She was first elected in 2016 and helped to write San Diego's Safe Storage of Firearms Ordinance, requiring the responsible storage of weapons in homes, in addition to a number of other programs. I'll let her take away to further discuss what steps our city has been taking to reduce gun violence and why the gun industry needs to play an important role in those efforts.
Thank you, Assemblymember, and welcome to everybody. It's great to see you on a Friday afternoon. You're going to get the attention that today's issue really deserves. And it's also good to see some of you. Pardon me. So I was thanking you for being here on a Friday afternoon. I really appreciate seeing all of you here. And also we'd be remiss not to acknowledge the passing of Senator Feinstein, who was a huge influence for many of us. She had the courage back in the 90s to introduce legislation that banned assault weapons. So let her be a lesson to all of us. I also want to thank Terra Lawson-Remer for pulling together today's panels and for highlighting some of the great work that we've done here in San Diego, and our Attorney General, who has been a true partner to San Diego as well as the state of California. So my work in this field started when I was elected city attorney back in 2016. It's hard to believe that it's been 7 years. I like to say that my agenda is a mom-centric agenda. And for me, the aha moment was Sandy Hook. And I still remember dropping the kids off at school that day and hearing that terrible news, and they were in kindergarten and second grade, and I was delivering them to a place where they should be safe. And I think that we can all agree that what we used to believe were safe spots are no longer safe spots. They're spots that we look around to see if somebody looks suspicious or if our lives could be at risk, whether we're going to church, whether we're going to a restaurant, whether you're going to your workplace or returning home. You don't want to have a dispute with your neighbor because you're concerned about the outcome of those tensions and how they've risen. So this mom-centric approach led me to try something novel, and that's gun violence restraining orders. And it was a program that we weren't sure would take off, but it has, to the tune of over 1,000 in the city of San Diego. That's a lot. And some people could say that's successful. Sure it is, because we've been able to intervene and prevent tragedy from occurring. But that number also indicates failure, because that's a lot of interventions that we had to insert ourselves in order to ensure that people could go about having a good life. Now, the moral of that story of gun violence restraining orders is that when I came into office, I didn't think there was much we could do at the local level. And what I think I'm most proud of is the courage to possibly fail. Because when you start a new program like that and you're threatened with federal laws, or you're on social media and you're hearing from people who do not like the direction that you're going in, it's very easy to buckle at the knees. That is not San Diego. So we did not do that. And it's been very successful. I would say that where we really encounter our concerns is having to remind people over and over again that gun violence restraining orders are accessible to anybody who wants to use them. So we're always on a mission to get those PSAs out. I see I'm running a little short on time. I would be also remiss not to mention that I've had exceptional support at the city level. Chris Ward was a council member before he ascended to the assembly and has always been a mover and shaker. And I'm very grateful to have our council member, Marnie Von Wilpert here, who introduced the ghost gun legislation. So together, we've really been able to make some monumental changes. And I want to thank our gun violence prevention groups for all the work they do. They're often the ones who are bringing me some terrific ideas. We've got 14 months left in office, so help me get it there. Thanks, everyone.
Well, thank you, City Attorney Elliott. And I definitely wanted to underscore, I think because of that leadership and that vision that she had, the state has been able to use the example of the city attorney's office to actually have them as lead agents to help train other city and district attorneys statewide. At the time, I think that we did some funding. The city of San Diego, the city attorney's office issued about 33% of the gun violence restraining orders statewide. So if you think about just for the lack of education, knowledge, or abilities of so many of these other responsible entities, that leadership really helped to train others too to be able to follow her lead. And with that, I'd like to introduce Councilmember Marnie Von Wilpert, who's the chair of the City Council's Public Safety Committee, and she's used this position to bring forward a progressive gun violence prevention policy for the city of San Diego. She wrote a first-of-the-kind ghost gun ordinance, and I'd like to hand it over to her to talk about some of the city's plans, continuing to push for policies that hold all part of the industry accountable.
Thank you very much, Assembly Member. Thank you, Supervisor Lawson-Remer, for having us today. It's an honor to sit here between two of my mentors, the City Attorney, Mara Elliott, and Chris Ward, our Assembly Member, who has helped me immensely in my journey as an elected official. So I got involved in gun violence prevention after I got elected when we had a mass shooting in the Gaslamp District, downtown San Diego. It was April 2021. We heard gunshots from City Hall, and then we heard the sirens. And it was the middle of the day, and we turned on the news, and we saw that a 32-year-old man had been walking down Fifth Avenue. He shot and killed a 28-year-old valet driver named Justice Bolden, ended his life, turned around and shot 4 tourists and 1 Scripps Ranch resident who happened to be walking downtown trying to go to a restaurant. He was tackled and apprehended by Good Samaritans until the police arrived. And I got a call from our police chief. And I said, Chief, who is shooting people in the middle of the gas lamp? 5 casualties? What's going on? And I found out about the shooter. He had prior violent felony convictions. He had a significant mental health history. And I said to the police chief, how the hell does a man who cannot pass a background check in California have a gun and shooting people in the middle of the day downtown? And he said, Marnie, he had a ghost gun. And I said, what is a ghost gun? I'm a deputy city attorney. I had not heard of this before. He said, well, it's when you go to a gun store, if you can't pass a background check, you can put your ID in your back pocket and go to the shelf below and buy the parts to make a gun at home. No background check required, no ID check required, and you can assemble them in as easy as 20 minutes. And the gun stores are making profits hand over fist on selling the parts of weapons. So I thought, well, this is ridiculous. This is a huge loophole. What do you mean that you can just make a gun at home? And so we decided to write a law about it. And I had to get around the Second Amendment. I had to get around state preemption, federal preemption. And I thought, okay, you want to sell the parts to make weapons, the unfinished frames, lowers, receivers, the trigger banks, the slides on top. All right, you can sell those. Just put a serial number on each part of a weapon. Make each part of a weapon a registered weapon, just like a fully furnished firearm. So to buy the parts of weapons, you have to pass a background check, just like you would to buy a fully assembled gun. Therefore, we're not banning anything. There should be no Second Amendment problem. And we wrote that into the law, and we got got to City Council, 8-1 vote. Mayor Todd Gloria signed it, and the day the mayor signed it, I got sued. And so did the whole city. We got sued by the San Diego County gun owners, and our city attorney's office defended us. And guess what? The federal court upheld our law. We won. And after that happened, the county, under Terra Lawson-Remer's leadership, passed the same ghost gun law. After we won in federal court, Los Angeles passed our law, San Francisco passed our law. I got a call from an Oakland City Council member on my birthday that year, who said, "Council member, I hear it's your birthday, but I want to know how we passed the ghost gun law." And so the power of one city to make change across the state is incredible. So I hope to continue doing that work. And I know Attorney General Rob Bonta has been incredibly helpful. And then I will detail one more law that we are just about to debut at our public safety meeting in October, and it's around procurement. How do we hold the gun industry accountable through our procurement processes? So cities, towns, states around the country need to buy weapons for law enforcement. And I want to thank the sheriffs who are here very much for keeping us safe. They're often at the other end of ghost guns. We've seen that shootings against our law enforcement have gone up in the last year. So thank you to the sheriffs for keeping us safe today. We appreciate what law enforcement does to execute the gun violence restraining orders, to make sure they get guns out of the hands of dangerous people. But when we buy weapons from gun dealers to staff our sheriffs and our police officers, we're giving taxpayer money to these companies. We need to know that these gun dealers aren't going out the back door and committing violations and not doing background checks or getting cited by ATF. We need to know taxpayer money is being used to change the behavior of the gun industry by making sure if we do a deal with a gun dealer and give them hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars, they're obeying the law. So I'm happy to talk about that more, but that's what we're going to work on next. So thank you.
Well, thank you, council member. I'm sure we'll be able to dive into that. We did want to introduce Ari Freilich. Freilich? Freilich, got it. He's the director of the California Department of Justice Office of Gun Violence Prevention and was a former state policy director for the Giffords Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence. He joined as the director in 2023 and is here to highlight some of the resources that the office has been providing regarding gun violence in California and some of their plans for prevention, broadly and specifically regarding some of the misconduct by corporate firearms industries.
Thanks for the introduction. Thank you for having me here and for being here. I'll just start. I mean, I've spent most of my career working with survivors. I know many of us are here both in a professional capacity and a personal one. So I just want to acknowledge the pain that is in this room and the people that are turning that pain into purpose, and not just purpose, not just protest, but policy that makes a difference and saves lives every day. Not a lot of headlines are written about the shooting that didn't happen. And that's a challenge. But we have to look at the data. We have to meet in moments like this and look at what's working and uplifting best practices, spotlighting gaps and remaining work to do. And that's why the Attorney General created an Office of Gun Violence Prevention last year. And I've had the honor for since May of serving as the first director of that office to spotlight what's working well, to be as helpful as I can in as many rooms as possible, to partner with survivors and advocates and local officials that are making a difference and can serve as a great example for local officials around the state. So we can uplift what's working well, spotlight gaps, and identify opportunities for improvement. DOJ has a lot of responsibilities in this space. There's the Chief Law Enforcement Agency, Chief Legal Department, and the Chief Data Records Repository for the state of California. And we've also worked both on defensive litigation to protect what California has built, fight against efforts to dismantle all our life-saving gun safety reforms, and to pursue affirmative civil litigation. So on the firearm industry accountability space, I think something I want to emphasize first is AB 1594. This is the Firearm Industry Responsibility Act legislation. The Attorney General was proud to co-sponsor, work with you, Assembly Member, to ensure a majority of states in this country treat victims of gun violence as less than. Prevents them from bringing the same lawsuit victims of any other corporate misconduct could bring. And California has gone in a different direction. It has enacted legislation that is clear about both providing public officials, but also victims of gun violence, the opportunity to seek fair justice in court when they can prove, the opportunity to prove that they were harmed by firearm industry members' violations of law. That's vital, and DOJ is in court today or right now defending that law against efforts to dismantle it and to ensure that everyone around the state understands their rights and responsibilities under that law. Other areas I'd want to spotlight, DOJ this year published its first ever crime gun report that is provides an unprecedented level of transparency about listing by name the number, by name, by dealer and manufacturer, the number of crime guns traced back to that source, that dealer or manufacturer, and the percentage of their overall sales that were later recovered from crimes. That's an unprecedented level of transparency that we hope has a variety of, can inform a lot of important action to protect communities and hold particularly egregious misconduct accountable. We also published our first data report, trying to shine a light on the many ways in which gun violence impacts California, the very significant long-term progress we have made as a state. I hope to talk more about this, but 2019, California set its all-time record low gun death rate. That didn't get as much attention as it deserved at the time. The lowest gun death rate ever recorded in CDC data going back over half a century. What we are doing matters, it makes a difference, and we have to understand that. We also have to understand some recent challenges, like the rest of the country, since the start of the pandemic, real significant increases in gun violence that have had a special impact on already disproportionately impacted communities. On the firearm industry accountability, I think the ghost gun crisis is difficult to overstate how severe and how quickly that crisis grew in California. In 2015, law enforcement agencies in California reported recovering 26 unserialized ghost guns in connection with crime. By 2019, that number grew to over 1,600. By 2021, that number grew to over 12,000. In San Francisco, in 2019, they reported that ghost guns were about 6% of homicide cases in 2019, over 40% 1 year later. This crisis took off in a really, really severe, dangerous way, and I want to applaud and recognize the leadership that was shown here in San Diego City and County that led efforts to address this crisis. I'm proud to say the Attorney General has been also, and the Department of Justice, active in pursuing civil litigation against ghost gun companies that violated state and federal law. Our enforcement teams have been active in recovering illegally owned ghost guns in the community. And legislation, AB 1621, among others, was enacted last year that finally comprehensively trickled up much of what was enacted here at the city and county level to enact comprehensive ghost gun reform at the state level. We've early days, but we've seen really positive indications that that has begun to slow, and it looks like reverse what had been an alarming proliferation of ghost guns across the state. I'll close there, but I'll just also put a quick flag in. There's other legislation, 23 exciting gun safety bills signed by the governor this week. And a number of those both strengthen responsibilities and accountability for the gun industry, and also create opportunities for partnership with responsible gun industry members too.
Great, thank you, Ari. We talked a little bit about AB 1594 and why California has been leading and getting into the space of holding the industry accountable. And I think just for a little bit of background, of course, in 2005, federally, there was the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, or PLCA. And we saw that the firearms industry had federal immunity. They got an exemption from that law to be able to hold themselves civilly liable when laws are broken. But there was some allowance there for states to be able to take action and pass state legislation where state laws or local ordinances have been violated. So that was the origin, the genius behind AB 1594. And I'm grateful for the Department of Justice for working hard to be able to defend that so we can actually make sure it's operative. But implicit in that discussion of industry accountability is that there's negligence. And I wondered if any or all of you could be able to talk about maybe some of your observation or of negligence by industry actors in our community.
I think maybe the easiest, simplest place to start is that this product is the leading cause of death for the American child. And so we have a responsibility, any company that is following the law or not has a responsibility to think about what they can do to save human life and address the fact that their product is the leading cause of death for the American child. And that an American at the national level is almost twice as likely to be killed in a gun homicide than they were just a decade ago. So I don't want to paint a broad brush against the whole industry. The vast majority of crime guns are sold by a small minority of dealers. And there are good dealers here in California who are doing everything they can to comply with the law, stop sales from people who have real risks and warning signs. But we know there's more to do. And there's a collective responsibility for this industry and for public safety and regulating officials to figure out what we can do to, again, address the intolerable fact that this is an industry that sells products often lawfully, responsibly used, but also the leading cause of death for the American child.
So I'd like to just jump in on that because I think negligence sounds excusable when I think that this is very intentional and that the market is so good and that guns have become such a part of the fabric of America that we're conditioned now to expect them in everyday life. From whether it's marketing a pink gun that looks like something Barbie would want to selling games to children so they get conditioned so that they want a real gun. I don't think there's any accident in that. I think that it's been lucrative. And until the industry suffers financially, there is not going to be the response that we would expect. And unfortunately, I think not only are we intentionally doing this to our own country, but to others as well. There was a case that unfortunately was dismissed last year that Mexico brought against the United States saying, you know what you're doing when guns are coming across to our country, and it's fueling industries that are illegal in our country. So I think that this is very intentional.
In terms of holding bad actors accountable who are, I agree, more than negligent, also reckless and intentionally selling things, we need both laws, strong laws and strong enforcement. So with the ghost gun regulations, it was fantastic to see one of the major lawsuits about ghost guns, not about individual users on the street who may have assembled one. It was against my biggest problem, which is across state lines, which is Polymer 80. Polymer 80 is a manufacturer of ghost gun parts, and they were the biggest seller into here, into San Diego County, into Los Angeles County, and the LA city attorney took the step to file a lawsuit against Polymer 80 saying, you know, you're selling unregulated parts to people who don't want to pass background checks. There's a reason people don't want the government to know they have an unserialized lower frame receiver slide, and they won an injunction. And between that and San Diego City's law, San Diego County's law, our police chief told me that their ghost gun apprehensions have been going down in San Diego because we're stopping the flood of product from these companies, the unfinished flames and receivers into San Diego. We're going to try and do the same thing with procurement. $5 billion a year goes to gun dealers throughout the country of taxpayer money. Taxpayers are actually the largest buyers of guns in this country because we need to outfit our law enforcement for them and have quality products law enforcement can use when they have to defend their own lives, the lives of others. But we don't want to be giving $5 billion a year to companies that are breaking the law on the other side. Imagine if they're selling crime guns and then our poor law enforcement has to be on the other end of those guns. We shouldn't be giving taxpayer money to those folks. It's very similar to what we already do with our construction contract dollars. Any construction contract over $1 million at the city of San Diego, the company who wants to bid on that project has to fill out an entire labor compliance form showing they have no labor law violations. They're not underpaying their workers. They don't have injuries or deaths on their work site. Imagine we give taxpayer money to someone who kills workers. So we're already doing that with other industries to change their behavior. We're not banning them. We're saying we want you to construct our city public works, but we want to hire good, responsible companies and use our taxpayer dollars to drive behavior change in the industry. We want to do the same thing with the gun industry and make sure that we are checking out who are we doing business with. And imagine if San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Jose, I mean, the buying power of that alone is incredibly important to change behavior, and that's what we're going to do next.
Thank you for that. So fundamentally, it's about shared responsibility, and I appreciate you got a chance, Councilmember, to go a little bit more into procurement. I got a question for Ari that we know a critical component of some of our local and state governments is being able to work together to be able to reduce our gun violence in communities, and it's the information sharing and some of the data. What do you see about how those of us at the city or county level can benefit from some of the data that you're collecting and analyzing? And how can you share some of the top line findings and takeaways from DOJ's recently published report that you referenced?
The first thing that we want to talk about is we've significantly cut gun death rates in California over the long term. We've been rowing in a different direction from much of the rest of the country, and that matters. And so I do want to start with that. We have to acknowledge it. Since 2006, even after pandemic era challenges, California cut youth gun homicides nearly in half, while the rest of the country saw a nearly 40% increase. We were rowing in very different directions. The data also shows some real recent challenges. Since the start of the pandemic, the nation saw record spikes in gun homicides and record spikes in gun sales. And that shows up in many different ways. I think, for instance, domestic violence calls, analysis of the domestic violence calls reported to law enforcement, 911 calls related to domestic violence. From 2019 to 2021, there was a 2% increase in overall domestic violence related calls, an 80% increase in California in the number of those calls involving threats or use of firearms. There's a lot more firearms being used to threaten and terrorize vulnerable people than there were just a few years ago. There's a lot of complicated reasons, but we can use data to at least diagnose and understand the problem and tailor our solutions. Data also, I think, can help do the truth-telling, diagnosis, and equity work of spotlighting where gun violence has impacts that don't often or always get the attention they deserve. I think it is difficult to speak about meaningful reduction in gun violence without also talking about racial equity. At the height of the pandemic, global health pandemic in 2021, the parents of a Black teenager in the United States were more likely to lose their child to a gun murder than every other cause of death you can think of imaginable combined. That is a moral crisis. That was in 2021. California's numbers are somewhat better, but still show vastly disparate impacts. I'm going to go in a lot. Warned you, I'm going to want to go in a lot of different directions, but what this also leads to is on victim care and aftercare. The data shows from the California Department of Public Health, 3/4 of people who were intentionally shot by someone else in the state survived that shooting. The fatality rate doesn't tell the full story. 3/4 of gun assault victims survive. They are patched up in our hospitals, often with life-altering trauma and injuries, and then too often sent right back out into the community in the same desperate circumstances where they were shot in the first place. We know that nationally, a majority of the time, in the typical case, the person, one or more people who was shooting at them, will not be arrested for that crime. So we're sending someone who has now suffered life-altering trauma and injury back into a community where, in the circumstances where the person who's trying to kill them is, in the typical case, still at large. And it should not surprise us that that person in California is victims of gun violence 60 times, more than 60 times as likely to be killed in a subsequent gun homicide than the average Californian. And that the leading cause of death by far for people who survive a gun assault injury in the 5 years after they are discharged from the hospital is gun murder. So I think the data can help. That's an example. Data can spotlight the need to better serve those victims, provide services from health, public safety, and victim care to ask the question, what are we doing to better serve that person and keep them safe and alive and on a path to peace, make it less likely that they'll be involved in cycles of retaliatory violence, and invest in programs that hire people whose job it is to keep that person safe and alive. So that's just one example.
Well, thank you, Ari, and I really appreciate, we'll lean on you for some of that information, and we have a lot more that we could discuss, and our Attorney General, I know, has been lucky to be able to join us as well. But we look forward to being able to implement a lot of these solutions here at the state and local level with all your partnership. I want to thank you for that discussion today, the collaboration that we have to be able to comprehensively prevent some of the gun violence, and I want to thank Supervisor Lawson-Remer for her leadership at the county to bring us all here together, and of course her team and her staff support for the hard work that they've done to make this a very informative program. So thank you, Supervisor.
Thank you all. Thank you again to all of our extraordinary panelists on the hard work you're doing to hold the gun industry accountable and gun manufacturers accountable. I thought a lot of the comments were really interesting, both in terms of what's been done and what more we can do. So thank you all. And I think our Attorney General is here. Yes. Okay, great. So I'm honored to have Attorney General Rob Bonta here in San Diego today for our summit. His office, the Attorney General's office, has the incredibly difficult work of trying to defend in court the extraordinary laws and legislation advanced by our governor and our state legislature. We talked about 23 laws over this past session, but there's been hundreds in the past 2 decades, and they are all under attack by constitutional originalists from across the country who would like to tell us that we cannot ban assault weapons, that we cannot pass laws to keep our community safe. I know I was looking at a brief that his office submitted. It looked like it had a spreadsheet of about 316 laws going back to the 1300s of examples of when and why communities have always legislated to prevent dangerous weapons that are only weapons of war and weapons of criminals from being distributed in our communities. And so not only is he on the front lines defending our laws from being overturned, he's also been leading litigation and leading the drafting and sponsorship of bills in the state Senate and state assembly, including Senate Bill number 2, that's really trying to tackle this issue of concealed carry and preventing the ability of people to carry guns in public places and banks. I don't know about you, but I don't think any bank teller wants a gun in the bank. And just really being thoughtful and creative about how we use law as a tool to protect our communities and to ensure that the safety of our kids is always paramount. So with that, please join me in welcoming Attorney General Rob Bonta.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored to be here. Rob Bonta, California Attorney General. Wonderful to be here in San Diego. And thank you, Supervisor, for the very kind and generous introduction. And really, I also appreciate the dialogue, conversation, exchange of ideas, including what we just heard on the most recent panel. And I want to, before I continue my remarks, I do want to make one statement about today's news, sad and tragic news. That today we lost a warrior for many things, for our country, for California, someone who represented us well, with courage and passion and values. And the loss of Senator Dianne Feinstein. Today we also lost a warrior against gun violence and for gun safety, someone who was ahead of her time, who fought for an assault weapons ban back in 1994. And continued to push based in part on her own horrible lived experiences, but brought that fire and that passion to government and to change and to policy. And so I want to recognize her and her legacy and her contributions. We need more warriors like her in this fight. And I'm proud to count all of you in this fight as fellow warriors in this battle. But I do want to recognize one of the great ones on today, a tragic day. I also want to just note that we often, rightfully, come together when we are in the wake of tragedy, when we have just suffered another mass shooting. And that is appropriate, that is right, to grieve together, to strategize and plan together for the future, how to address the pain that we have just recently suffered. But it's also important to stay at this in the in-between times, all the times. We are in the middle of a full-on state of emergency and a state of crisis when it comes to gun violence. We proudly lead the world in so many things in this great country. We do things first and best in many places, in many spaces. And we lead the world in one horrible thing. We lead the world in gun violence. That is not something anyone wants that title. And it is a choice. We're not here on accident. It's because of decisions we have made or courage we have failed to show as a nation. And we can do better and we must do better. And I'm grateful that we're here when the vigil candles have burnt out and the media has moved on to another story to plan and to collaborate and to learn from one another and to prepare for the future. That is important. So I just want to say thank you for being able to be here together. And want to also just lift up the importance of collaboration and information sharing. The data and the experience across space and time, across this country and local jurisdictions in different states is full of pathways forward. I've learned, having had the honor and privilege of being in elected office for over 15 years now, that there's not that many brand new ideas. There's just ideas that haven't been used here yet, and that we can learn from others who are doing it right and doing it well. And you learn through conversation, and it opens up our eyes, and it increases opportunity. So let me use that as an opportunity to thank our Supervisor Terra Lawson-Remer for convening us, for bringing us together, for facilitating these conversations and providing the opportunity to learn and grow and to move forward. And I'll also mention that it's important for our shared constituents, for those who are elected and support electeds and work on elected staffs, that our constituents, our shared constituents, see us working together, that we're getting out of our silos, whether it be at the local level, state, or federal, that we're not just occupying a singular lane, but we are reaching out of that lane to others to join forces and team up and work together. This crisis requires that, and I think our constituents deserve that. So pleased and proud to see that on full display today. And let me take an opportunity to thank folks who have who are doing this today, but do it every day and have done it for years as advocates fighting to enhance gun safety and prevent gun violence. I want to thank Congressman Mike Levin and his team, Council President Pro Tem Monica Montgomery Stepp, Congressperson Sarah Jacobs, Senator Catherine Blakespear, who I was recently at a press conference with Governor Newsom to announce a bill that she got signed into law. Congratulations to her. Assemblymember Chris Ward, who's been an absolute champion for many, many years. City Attorney Mara Elliott, who has written the book on gun violence restraining orders. And I try to shout from the rooftops and tell anyone who's willing to do it like her that they should do it. And they should have done it yesterday. And that's just one of the many great things that our city attorney does well. So thank you. And of course, Councilmember Marnie Von Wilpert, leading courageously on ghost guns and gun manufacturer accountability, sends me wonderful texts of the great stuff San Diego is doing, so that I can tell others, if you want to be as good as San Diego, you got work to do. So San Diego's, let me just say, San Diego's special. You have a special set of leaders. I'm proud to stand with you and team up with you. And you're in good hands here on many issues, certainly when it comes to gun violence. Having said that, unfortunately, not all people in this state and in this nation have the privilege and the good fortune to have leaders like here in San Diego. And that can lead to frustrating conversations and disappointing votes. And so I'm here to say, don't give up, keep pushing. It's always the right thing to do, to fight for our children and their future and our community and our neighborhood safety, and to do the things that we know work. If we follow the facts, if we follow our values like wanting to keep kids safe in school and have everyday people be able to do everyday things without fear of gun violence, we will always be in the right, and not just stopping with facts and values, but turning it into action. It is past time to act, and to act boldly, and to change the course of where we're going in this state and in this nation when it comes to gun violence. I should say in this nation. In this state, we have changed course. We are an example of what is possible. And here are some of the horrible facts that exist nationwide when it comes to our state's, our nation's rather, unique American disease. There are 48,000 gun deaths on average every year in the US. Guns, as was mentioned, are the leading cause of death among our children and our young adults. And one of the things we all know is that our society should be judged on how we treat our most vulnerable, our sick, our poor, our seniors, and yes, our children. And with guns being the leading cause of death among our children, that is unacceptable. and we must and we will do better. American children are more likely to die from gun violence than in any other comparable country. And as was mentioned rightfully, always important to use that equity lens and realize that gun violence doesn't hit all of our communities in the same way. It doesn't hit them all equally. The disparities experienced by communities of color are some of the starkest examples of inequity in our country today. A Black child in America is at least 15 times more likely to be murdered with a firearm than a white child. 15 times. The parents of a Black teenage son are as likely to lose their child to gun violence as to every other cause of death combined. And again, choices, decisions, intentionality. It doesn't have to be this way. We can change these statistics, change our fate, save lives, go in another direction. Why do I think that? Because California has done that. California is proof that you can change from being a state with some of the highest firearm mortality rates in the nation to one of the lowest with good policy, by following the facts and the evidence, by having the courage of our convictions and turning the facts and our values into action. And we did it. "30 years ago, California's gun homicide rate was the third highest in the country, 50% above the rest of the US. Now, we're one of the safest states. Last year, gun homicides were 33% below the rest of the US. 30 years ago, California had the third highest rate of youth firearm homicides for victims under 25. And in 2022, it was 45% below the rest of the nation. So moving from one of the worst to one of the best with policy and with decisions and with actions. And if the national gun death rate matched California's over the last 10 years, over nearly 140,000 Americans would still be with us today, would still be alive if California's stats and death rate matched the rest of the nation, or the rest of the nation matched ours. And hundreds of thousands more gunshot injuries could have been prevented as well. And so again, cause and effect, not luck, not an accident, not happenstance, not even correlation. This is causation. These sound decisions lead to lives being saved. It is that direct. It is that causal. And in California, some of our laws are under attack. They are our assault weapons ban being struck down, our large capacity magazine ban struck down, and we are defending these laws in court. They are common sense, they are constitutional. We will continue to fight for safety of our communities and make sure that the will of the people to be safe in our community, the right to be safe from gun violence, that right is preserved and that freedom is provided. We are also always on the cutting edge of the latest and the greatest approaches to enhance public safety and safety from gun violence. Proud that we passed AB 1594 in California in 2022 to create a pathway for Californians harmed by gun violence to hold irresponsible gun manufacturers and distributors accountable in court and to pierce that immunity through a legal pathway provided under the federal law. We also just recently signed into law and got passed SB 2, our Bruin compliant concealed carry weapon law that I was proud to sponsor this year, and was signed into law on Tuesday. And again, we are telling everyone who's willing to listen that red flag laws work, that gun violence restraining orders work, and that they are underutilized. And more people's lives will be saved if we use them the way they're designed to be used. Again, San Diego County, a nation leader and certainly state leader in how to use red flag laws effectively to save lives. I want to make an important point about something Ari was just saying on the panel, and let me take this opportunity to thank Ari Freilich for his leadership. Thank you for being willing to come into our California Department of Justice to lead our first of its kind in the nation Office of Gun Violence Prevention. I think the Biden administration really liked it because they created one recently too. So I'll take credit for that until the Biden administration tells me otherwise. But more of that, please. Every Attorney General's office should have it. More places need to be uplifting and promoting and scaling and pushing out the data-driven, effective gun violence prevention policies that exist, and bringing them into our communities and into our neighborhoods so people's lives can be saved. And I want to thank Ari for his leadership and for leading our fearless team. We are doubling down on the data that Ari was talking about regarding cycles of violence, the fact that those who are victims of gun violence but survive are at high likelihood of being murdered by a gun in the coming years. The fact that retaliation occurs if that violence, a cycle of violence is not interrupted. And so we're investing in those approaches to end those cycles of violence and to stop those statistics from unfolding the way we know that they will if we don't act. That's why the California Violence Intervention and Prevention Grant Program, or CalVIP, we invested $200 million into that program, helping cities and communities across the state. And we also are the first, one of the first in the nation to establish a Medicaid reimbursement stream for violence prevention counseling work. So I want to also just share this. We can't, at the in government and in our elected officials, do much of anything without the support and activism of our community activists and advocates. So when I walked into this room, I was very grateful to see the red and orange shirts, who are always present, always fighting, marching, acting, speaking up, siding with and pushing elected leaders to do their job and act and do something about gun violence. So let me say thank you to all of our activists and advocates, always proud to stand with you. I also want to say that we bring our lived experiences to all we do, including to our fight for safer communities and to address gun violence. And that's true of me as someone who is a parent of 3 children. And I've had some titles I never could have imagined when I was growing up that I'm very, very proud of, certainly including Assembly Member and Attorney General. And but the one I'll always be proud of the most, the titles I'll always be the proudest of are husband and dad. And as dad, my wife, Mia Bonta, you might know her as the better Bonta, or Assembly Member Mia Bonta. We are on shared family text threads with our children. And when I was as a legislator, when I was in Sacramento, my wife was working in the Bay Area, we got a text from our oldest that you never want to get as a parent. Here's what it said. It said, "Dad, Mom, I'm in lockdown because of an active shooter in my high school. I don't know what's happening or when, if we will be released from lockdown, but I'm in lockdown and I'm 90 miles away. This is my firstborn child and you don't know what to do. And you wait and you hope and you wonder why there is such a thing as a text thread between parents and their children, that their children is in lockdown from an active shooter at school." And luckily, as time passed, we were able to get the text that we were hoping for and dying to get. That lockdown was now over and the active shooter threat had passed. And we were lucky. There are people who have been touched and hurt in ways much more severe than that. And I think that pain, that hurt should fuel our commitment to change. And I know we all bring that to this work every day. We should own it and harness it and let it drive us forward because it's important. And when I was a legislator, I got elected in 2012, November. And for those of you who follow this closely, and that's everyone in this room, that December was Newtown. Sandy Hook Elementary School, a place and a school that we will never forget, nor should we. And the fact, I mean, these were kids, I didn't know them, they didn't know me, They were across the country in another state, but that one hurt, that it was children. And that even in the wake of that, refusal and obstinance and barriers to action, to common sense action at the congressional level. And we all remember President Obama in tears talking about that. Whatever it is, whether it's someone you don't know or someone you love or anyone in between, if that drives you to act and to push, let's do it. You know, we need more of that together, and that can be the fuel that'll push us forward. And so we have work to do. And none of us can do it alone. And so proud that we have each other, grateful for all of you, that we're all in this fight and all on the same team. And I continue to be hopeful and optimistic that we can make change and that we will make change. And sometimes change is not linear. Sometimes you take a couple steps forward and then you take some back. But the most important thing is to pick yourself up and dust yourself off and keep fighting. Keep putting one foot in front of the other until the change that we deserve, that our children deserve, that our communities deserve, that our future deserves, until it's realized. And we will only do that if we do it together. And there is nothing we can't accomplish if we do it together. So proud of San Diego, proud of all of your fight, your advocacy. Please know I will continue to fight with you every step of the way. Thank you.
Just want to say thank you again to everyone for being here, to all of our panelists, to our Attorney General, to the leaders across our county who've done so much work on this issue, and very privileged and honored to be able to copy their work here at the county. So thank you so much. And thank you to all of our advocates and organizers who are so fierce on this issue locally and statewide and nationally. Thank you all for all that you do. So please give yourselves a round of applause and give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you for being here.